Welcome to this month's Learning Community AMA. We're speaking with Stefanie Johnson, Professor of Management at the University of Colorado Boulder's Leeds School of Business, and author of the book Inclusify. Stefanie has dedicated much of her career to uncovering how organizations can successfully combine diversity with inclusivity. She's published over 60 journal articles and book chapters, consults for some of the biggest companies in the world, and is an in-demand speaker. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's jump into some of the questions we received from the community. First of all, could you summarize what you mean by inclusifying?
Yeah, so inclusifying, the original idea why I felt like I had to make up a word for this is that inclusion always sounds kind of passive to me, that it's like you're included because you have been invited. And I think to really make people feel included, I think you actually have to be a bit more intentional, not just letting them in the room, but actually working to create an environment where they feel they can be valued while still being their same self, their full self. And so I'll say the Inclusify includes recognizing these two basic and essential human needs of belonging, of course, which I think we often think of. We want to be accepted and valued. But the other half is uniqueness. And so that means you want to be valued and accepted while still being your true and authentic self.
A recent McKinsey survey showed that the COVID pandemic has led to large numbers of women considering leaving the workforce or switching to less demanding jobs, in large part because of the added burdens of childcare and homeschooling. There are concerns that this could lead to a significant drop in the number of women in senior leadership roles, potentially wiping out years of progress. How can companies do more to support employees with childcare responsibilities at this time?
Oh, I mean, it's such a great question because, I mean, I have two little kids. I have a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old. And, I like to think that my partner and I are pretty equitable, but it's still like, it is, for both of us, it's a huge extra demand on our time. And I think there's a part that children kind of maybe have a tendency to gravitate toward their mom more than their dad, I guess, maybe if you're a mom and a dad couple. So I don't know, there's definitely things that organizations can do. And I'll say some are doing a really good job. And it's like, for sure, increasing flexibility. That's easy because we're already doing that. We've created a more flexible workplace. Most people are working from home unless they're an essential service. So even if your kids are in school, at least you're home. Some organizations have provided financial resources for this, all of a sudden there's this new cost. And I think, some people weigh the cost of hiring childcare versus the amount of money I'm making and, that I pay tax on this. And if you do the math at some point, I think, many women and men are like, well, maybe it's just cheaper for me to stay home. But what they don't think is, for the organization they work for, that's a huge cost, them leaving. And so that if the organization provided added incentives to help with childcare, it would actually, I think, I've run the numbers, I think it saves everyone money because the cost of replacing an employee might be a full year of that individual's salary, up to 150% of that person's salary. And especially right now when I think it's quite difficult to train new employees because we're remote. I feel like you've really got to keep your talent. And then the long term, you're creating employees who are going to be very dedicated and engaged because you've done this, supported them. Other things I'd say, just to take the stress off, several companies I've worked with have taken performance appraisals off the table for this year. Some like Wikimedia have said, we're going to give everyone reduced work hours and still pay you at full time. And it's kind of symbolic because I think many people are having to reduce their work hours. But when your organization says, we actually understand that you need to do this, and rather than, having to feel like you're doing something wrong or sneaking, we're just going to say, you are currently a part-time employee paid at a full-time rate because we want to support you. So I think there's a lot of things like that organizations can do, but I just have to, I mean, it's just a tough situation no matter what, because for most moms and dads, and I think your kids are like the most important thing in your world. And so I think like, I just want to take care of mine. And if that means like, sometimes like the choice between job and family can be a tough one. And I'll say my organization is super supportive, but it's still like, it has this added weight at night. Like I wake up thinking about it and it's just like, no one planned for this, right? So I think many organizations are kind of like doing what they can, and no one has had the plan for this. So, when there's a global pandemic and schools shut down, here's how HR is going to handle it. Like I just don't think that we did that disaster scenario planning. And so I think they're, just struggling to figure it out. And I think those are a couple good ones, providing funds, just like many companies do when you adopt or have a child. And then just creating more flexibility around performance and even hours that are spent. Fewer in-person calls. Maybe you can do more stuff that's asynchronous. Because that just like, if you have to log your kid on to their Google School at 12 o'clock, like it's just tough when you also have a meeting at the exact same time. You can tell this question hits hard for me as I'm trying to deal with it on my own.
Do you think the widespread switch to more remote work is impacting how diversive and inclusive companies can be for all kinds of people?
Yeah, I think there's a huge potential just in so many ways, because we know that everyone loves flex time, right? This is like, it's positively linked to engagement and people like working from home. I jumped on the highway. We have like small freeways in Boulder, Colorado. And the other day to go buy something, and there's like no one on the highway. It's like, this has saved, just hours and hours of time for people. They don't have to commute. But we also know that when women take flex time, that people judge them negatively for it. So even if I take the same amount of time as a male colleague, people view me as less dedicated. But in some instances, he might be viewed as more dedicated. And I think that the penalty is even greater for parents, per your last question, that I think women on average with children earn 11% less than a similar woman without children. And both of those are less than men. And men with children actually earn 11% more. That's not relevant to my point here, but annoying, I think. So I think just having everyone work from home removes that stigma of you're choosing to work from home. That means you're not dedicated. It's like, actually the office is closed, so I have to work from home. And that's, I think, actually a great thing. And in the long term, I think if we can maintain some of this, like I hope one day we can go back to work in school. But even when we do that, there's elements of this, of learning to work at home, that I would say lots of companies that I talked to and worked with before the pandemic, and I often advise flex time is a great way to support women in the workforce. And that like, well, we can't do that. We have sensitive data and, math systems and like all of these things that it just doesn't work. Our culture is an in the office culture. And it's like, well, I guess it worked for everyone, right? Because we're all doing it. And so that means you can continue, and maybe we should, because we've put so much effort learning how to do this. We might as well like kind of make a long-term use of that flexibility. The other thing that stands out to me is that just because we're doing everything differently, at least in my experience, it seems like we're doing everything differently, I think it actually creates an opportunity to really change things, because I think change is often hard because you've been doing something this way for a long time. It's how we've always done it. It's the status quo, and interrupting that is really tough, because if that's the way we've always done it, it just feels right for people who've been there the longest. And those are often people with the most power. But now we're doing everything differently. And so when we create new norms, I think there's a real opportunity to create a workplace that actually works for everyone. That, these old workplaces were built in a time when our communities were much less ethnically diverse and had much less gender diversity in the workforce, and many other types of diversity that we expect today to create an equal opportunity, for persons with disabilities or whatever it might be. It's like, it's hard to change things when they're so set in stone. But since we're changing everything anyway, we might as well build like a more accessible workforce, right? Because we're going to have new, like I've heard, companies are putting up, they've all switched to open office plans. This is a big thing. And then now they're like, oh man, we need walls, because if you do the numbers for how many people you can have in a shared space, at least in the States, we have these like requirements of for disease transmission, you can only have X number of people depending on how many square feet or whatever. But once you put walls up, you can add a lot more people. So you're rebuilding the office scape. You might as well, while you're doing that, be very thoughtful of persons with disabilities, for example.
How can remote companies, particularly ones where the employees have never actually met each other, create a kind of inclusive culture?
Yeah, so I think that's tough on the belonging side, because as I said, I think of inclusion as uniqueness and belonging. And most of the time I see that uniqueness is the challenge. It's letting people be themselves. Well, in this case, I think people are feeling much more like themselves because, like I'm sitting in my basement and wearing stretchy pants. So I feel quite like me, but it's the connection, the belonging that I think is harder right now. And I think you just got to get creative. Like there's still ways to bond and actually ways that you can, similar to my last statement, that you can create new cultural activities that, because they're new, they actually are more inclusive. Like you might have gone to drinks after work. I think this is like a very common cultural activity, happy hour. And, that's not terribly inclusive, right? Like not everyone drinks. You might not drink for health reasons or religious reasons. Not everyone wants to hang out with their coworkers in the evening. We know there's some gender bias associated with like heavy drinking events, and people with children might need to get home because their kids, maybe they're let out of school or whatever. And so you can't do that. So now it means we can create something different. Like maybe it's coffee hours, that people are Zooming on a coffee hour and getting to know each other. I just heard this idea today. I think it's actually from the UK, that it has, there's a hashtag, I think it's like bring your whole selfie to work. And people take pictures of themselves and post them on the internet and talk about something personal about themselves that people might not know. And so it's just like trying to create that connection that is, I think it's harder, like if you can't actually see people. It's just, I think it's, it's not easy. It's just a new, different challenge. But I think, if we look at maybe millennials and Gen Zers who have grown up with technology like this, they clearly find a way to connect with people virtually. Like there's, they have hundreds, maybe thousands, and some really close friends whom they've never met. They only met them online, right? And, sometimes they game together. Sometimes it's just through chat and text. And so, for someone like me who grew up without any no technology, no internet really till I finished high school, I think it's hard. It's a learned skill. But if we look at, kids today, it's clear that it is a possibility. And so maybe, we need to start promoting some Gen Zers into leadership roles to say, hey guys, tell us, how do we build connection in this virtual world? Like I'll say my college classes right now, because I'm a university professor, they're online, right? And so that we lose a huge amount of what I consider like the in-class bonding experience. We have these conversations, you can see people's emotions. And so we can't do that. So we replaced that with an Instagram. We have like a shared Instagram that we, like when I have things for them to read, I post it. When people have good experiences or tough challenges, they post it. And it's just an Instagram of our class. It's not like, I don't have to see everyone's personal stuff. So it's like a group messaging. And I think that it just creates connection, because I see them all times of day or night. It's not like one more email in the endless string of emails that I'm just trying to get through, it's like a kind of a fun place I get to go and check in with them. And I know companies are doing this too on things like Yammer. So I think it's just getting creative.
So I think you gave some examples just now, but can you share what has worked for you when teaching, coaching, or otherwise communicating remotely?
Yeah, I think social media I think works well. I think really encouraging people to keep their cameras on, because even if we're not face to face, like at least I can see you. And if you're looking like skeptical or, nodding, it helps, I think, create understanding. Like I think it can be exhausting too, but I think that can really help. I think sending, like I say this all the time, like sending meeting questions. If you're going to have a meeting, actually, you need to prepare as the leader or whoever's hosting this meeting. Send the meeting questions in advance, give people a chance to think through them, collect responses, and then curate a conversation, because it's not as like easy as it is in person. And I think we have to be more thoughtful about like who's contributing. It can be hard if you're in like a big Zoom room with lots of little squares to get a word in. And so I think it's the person running the meeting, if they're trying to really get the most out of the meeting, it's like, how can I get everyone's ideas out on the table? And that means even if you can't be there, at least you've sent your thoughts in advance. And if something crazy comes up and some people can't be there, the person curating or running the meeting can still bring their thoughts into the discussion. And then letting each person kind of contribute, making sure that no one in that Zoom box is just, sitting there checking email, I think helps as well.
We also had a lot of questions about the hiring process and applying for jobs, things like that. Is it possible to completely remove bias from the hiring process?
I guess it depends on what is meant by bias. So like, am I biased against, women or people of color, or persons with names that sound like they're from a different race? Then yeah, just remove the names, right? And that I found in my own research, I think that can work to reduce that kind of bias. You still may meet people before you hire them, usually, at least on Zoom, but at least you've taken one layer of bias out. But that's only that's bias that's occurring in 2020, but it doesn't account for the bias that's happened the previous 20 to 60 years, and like structural biases and opportunities that might have impacted who's even in that applicant pool. And so I don't know, I think as a society and societies can work on those biases, right? Like this is something we need to be actually actively thinking about, is how our systems are set up to create inequity. But from an organizational perspective, I think you can do, what you do best. It's like impact on where are you recruiting? How are you selecting? What are your selection criteria? More and more companies are using diversity and inclusion as a selection criteria. So just adding it in, like what have you done to contribute to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, or, however your company phrases it. And it doesn't have to be like, well, I'm a woman, like I'm a Mexican woman, so that's my contribution. Like, it's okay if that's not you. You can still do things. And if you haven't done anything, then, maybe that's not the kind of person you want to bring into your organization. If you're not supporting, LGBTQ rights, or you're not doing anything to try to eliminate poverty, or like, if there's really nothing, then, maybe that's something that person needs to work on. So you can include that. And some of these things, it's all like contributing to trying to create a more equitable workplace and world. But I think it's a lot longer process than just what do you do at the point of selection. That's where I live, it's like, how do companies recruit, select, retain? But I recognize it's like a thin slice of the inequities that exist.
What are some ways in which companies unknowingly and unintentionally exclude qualified potential job candidates or discourage particular demographics from applying for jobs?
Yeah, it's so interesting that you asked that, because I was just working with an organization this week that their website has no mention of diversity, equity, inclusion. And like everyone on the website kind of looks the same. And that is a deterrent. Like it's not an intentional deterrent. And these folks are actively trying to increase diversity. And if that's your goal, then like, I think you should present your company in a way that is, of course, authentic and transparent and honest. Like you can recognize that you don't have a ton of diversity and it's something that's important to you. And here's what you're doing about it. So make sure like a variety of faces are seen on the website. And then there's even the language that you use. It could be on the website, but also in job postings. And there's a few apps out there that you can drop job ads into, and it tells you if you're using gendered language, like language that's going to be more appealing to men than women. For example, like work in a fast-paced competitive environment might make women like shy away. But if you just rephrase that same thing and said, you know, come work in an organization that promotes from within and, you know, tries to evaluate people on their performance, then you're going to get like men will still apply, but you might get more women applying as well. So I think that's a kind of easy tool that tech has provided, because it's machine learning models to see what kind of jobs tend to be appealing to different genders.
Is there anything a job applicant can look for or ask about during their interview process that might provide an indication to them as to how balanced diversity and inclusivity are within an organization?
Yeah, for sure. I always kind of ask this at the end of the process, you know, like after I have an offer or like I'm farther along, but I think it's 100% fair game to ask, what are you doing for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion? You know, what do your turnover and promotion rates look like for men and women, for, you know, other groups? Like you can get all the information you can get. What are you doing to change that? Because a lot of companies aren't there, but they're working on it. And, you know, what is your culture? What about your culture is supportive for people who look like me or for my group? And I think you get probably the best information from talking to other people and just asking those candid conversations. Like maybe not the hiring manager, but if you're a woman, other women in the organization, say, you know, what is it like to be a woman? Will I have fair opportunity? Are there any women who've been promoted? Or like how many women turn over? Like just try to get that information. And then there's just like more practical questions like, so this has nothing to do with gender or race, but if I come in, what is my path to ensure that I succeed and grow and am promoted and developed? And if they don't have answers to that, I don't think it matters if you're a woman or a man. It's just like, that's not a company where I would want to be, right? I want to work at a company where they care about their employees enough to invest in their employee development.
What are some common ways well-meaning leaders fail to inclusify?
Yeah. So like, I think it really comes down to missing out on one of those two basic and essential human needs of uniqueness and belonging. So there's leaders who they're really good at belonging. Like they just are very skilled at building culture, and they're well-intentioned because they want to create a culture that is like everyone feels like they belong. But oftentimes those same leaders are not recognizing the importance of uniqueness. So they hire on culture fit. If you don't fit the culture, you know, maybe you leave because it's not comfortable. And the goal is actually to create a strong culture of belonging. But if you don't also layer in the uniqueness part, that like you can belong and still be yourself, then what you end up with is a very homogenous group where even people who have difference don't feel like they can share that in the organization. They kind of like leave it at home. And that's just, you know, we know that is linked to things like higher turnover. It's just exhausting to constantly be acting while you're at work. So that's one, that's the, you know, high belonging, low uniqueness. One thing that came out in my research for Inclusify is this idea that some leaders were really like champions for diversity. They were really focused on equality, but maybe their messaging around it actually alienated other maybe majority group members and sort of signaled incompetence for the women they were trying to support, or the persons of color they were trying to support, or the women of color they were trying to support, because they didn't describe it as like, this is someone who is, very talented. It's like, you guys are being sexist. You need to promote more women. And it just doesn't work, right? Like, no one's going to promote more women because someone has shamed them and said you have to promote women. I think you still need to communicate why this person is outstanding. And of course they are, right? Like, that's why this individual is championing them. But because they're focused on oftentimes like people who've become aware of, wow, this is really unfair, they haven't had the years of learning how to communicate that in a way that is actually beneficial to the person they're trying to support. So that is a high uniqueness, but maybe low belonging, because they're actually creating divisions on the team rather than cohesion. And then of course you could do both, like uniqueness and belonging, but like only a little bit. And that's like not being fully intentional, just thinking like, I think this will happen. I understand the importance of uniqueness. I get the belonging, and I think it'll happen naturally over time, but I don't want to rock the boat. And that's, again, a well-meaning leader who just needs that little nudge to say, if you think this is important, then you have to actually kind of tie some actions to your values. And then that will have the real impact you're trying to get to.
Do you have any suggestions for individuals who are not in a leadership position but would still like to encourage and support their organization in finding a more even balance between diversity and inclusivity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the amazing things about inclusion is that it's really something that any of us can do. It's not like you have to be a leader to make someone feel seen. Any of us can do that. Like, I think, in the book I write about this feeling of invisibility that a lot of people have in the workplace. Like, no one knows who they are. No one sees them. They don't speak in meetings. People don't know their name. Or, maybe if you're a woman of color, you're confused for a different woman of color, or people confuse you with like the cleaning staff, which just sounds ridiculous, but it's like a terribly common phenomenon for women and women of color and men of color to be seen as like maybe a lower status position. And so that really damages that person's feelings of inclusion. But all it takes is like one of their colleagues, doesn't have to be their leader, anyone, to see them, to know their name, to engage in small chat with them, to correct people when they say something wrong. If someone makes an off-color comment, like, it's exhausting for the people who are hit with microaggressions or full-on aggression to always have to stand up and say, okay, so the one woman in the room is going to say why that's inappropriate. But, anyone can speak up, actually, right? And if more people start speaking up, it doesn't become something about, I'm the complaining person. It's like, this must be a thing because more people are starting to mention it. So I think that, like, being an ally, helping people feel seen, trying to get to know people. Like, I think we often underestimate the value of like true connection, like people knowing who you are. Like, if you think about who your friends are, and I have like one friend she's my best friend since 4th grade. And there's something that's so special about that because she really knows me, right? And obviously I'm not going to have any coworkers who've known me since 4th grade, but there are coworkers I have who really know who I am. They get me. They've taken the time to learn about, my 2 kiddos or whatever it might be. And that, it really changes things. And it doesn't have to be my boss. It can just be, a colleague, or even one of my direct reports or one of my students. Like, it doesn't matter. It's just connection. And so I think we can all be doing that, and we should. And like, I was actually super committed to this until I was sent home from work and haven't gone back. And now it's a lot harder. I think I've kind of dropped the ball on helping, making sure that everyone is seen, because I don't see them. So but I still can, right? Something we can all still be doing, reaching out, trying to talk by phone, connecting, having a socially distanced walk in the park or whatever it might be, just to make sure people feel seen, because this can be like an extremely isolating moment in history.
Where is the line between creating a strong company culture and being a bit like a cult?
Well, I think that if your company culture is one that the culture is founded on valuing difference, on uniqueness, it can't be a cult, right? Because cults are all about sameness. It's like the high belonging, low uniqueness. We want you, in fact, like in cults, people will wear the same outfits, right? Everyone wears the same clothes because you want everyone to not be an individual, but you're just part of this more important collective. That's a cult. But if your culture is a culture that's one of their, the core values of that culture is celebrating difference, then I don't know how that could be a cult, right? Like, we're all about being ourselves and bringing that to work, then I don't know. And if it is a cult, then like I will join that cult, because a cult of people who can be themselves like just sounds great to me.
Do you think the way that a lot of people apply the idea of company culture these days is counterproductive to diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think so. I think those high belonging, low uniqueness cultures where, companies who refer to their employees by, the company name, like you're not a woman or a man, you're a whatever company. I think that doesn't encourage uniqueness. I think it really encourages sameness and like basically masking, covering, trying to fit in, even if it's inconsistent with your personal views and values and who you are. And that's all. And it works, right? This is why cults work, because it feels good to be a part of something, even if you have to give up pieces of yourself. It just doesn't work in the long term, because that's exhausting. And if you, unlike cults, organizational cultures, you go home at night and you have to face that disparity of who you are at work and who you are at home. And that conflict is, causes emotional distress for people. So yeah, for sure.
What's the book, obviously aside from your own, that you find yourself giving to people most often?
I like Dolly Chugg has a book that is how to be the person you're meant to be, how to be a goodish person. And it's also a book on diversity, but the idea is like, maybe people don't want to confront things like unconscious bias because it makes them feel like, oh no, I'm a bad person. I'm sexist, I'm racist. And her book is like, we all are a little bit. And so that doesn't mean just go be sexist, but it's like, you got to let go of that desire to try to manage your identity and like, think like, I don't want to be a bad person. It's just like, just be a goodish person. Like do what you can each day to contribute to greater equity, and don't not confront diversity and inclusion because it makes you feel bad.
Do you have any advice for becoming a more confident public speaker?
Practice a lot, I guess. That seems to make people feel better. Just like practice over and over again. Practice in a mirror, practice on a Zoom. You can like tape yourself and watch it. I think that helps a ton, just seeing yourself. I know I did this in like 20 years ago in graduate school. We were taped and delivering a research presentation. And I noticed in watching my own tape that I like touched my hair constantly. I'm probably doing it while I'm talking to you. And then I'm like, now I know that I can stop doing that, right? In fact, I would like tie my hair back every time I spoke just so I wouldn't like pet myself the whole time I was talking. I think that it can improve your speaking, but also just like make you more confident to see like how great you really are when you're doing it.
Do you have a particular writing routine?
Not now, because I'd say I'm not writing anything right now, but while I was writing Inclusify, I'd wake up like every morning before anyone in the house, like at 5 a.m., sometimes 4 a.m. And I would like sneak downstairs and just write before anyone got up. And it felt like my luxury of time that, I think in the morning for me, like I have like lots of thoughts and ideas, and having, two little kids and a partner at home, I think it's sometimes hard to find that space where you can just be creative and think and work. And so that like early morning for me worked really well. I know other people who do the exact same thing, and like late at night, everyone goes to bed and they go, have a cup of tea and write. And I think that is great. There's lots of advice out there, like write a little bit every day. And I think that, maybe depends on who you are. I don't know if I wrote every day. Like sometimes I wanted to sleep in, so I didn't write. But I found that just like, it felt like I was, rather than, oh, I have to do this, I'm like, I'm doing something for me that I enjoy doing, and I get to do it on my own time. It's my own choice. And I loved it. I hope after, right now I'm doing a lot of like presentations and talks and stuff on the book, but I hope to get back to that and have just like that kind of like me time. It feels good.
So to finish with a more serious question, what do you feel is the biggest threat to us as a species, and what would you do to mitigate it?
Oh yeah, that is a serious question. I think it's global climate change for sure. As I am sitting in Colorado with Colorado right now in the US, and this is true in California as well, and I'm sure other states, is just hit with so many fires. Like if I walk outside right now, and in fact, even my voice is kind of scratchy because there's so much smoke in the air. And why do we have so many fires? Because it's a lot hotter than it used to be. We have greater drought. This is just like, if I can think of like most disasters that I see outside of COVID are really due to climate change, like, huge storms, flooding, fires, extreme drought. Like, I think that is actually far more pressing of an issue than, well, at least in the United States, than we're really giving it credit for. And like, if you read the data and the projections, like I think that's the biggest thing that we need to be working on.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Where can people find you if they'd like to learn more? And do you have any upcoming projects you'd like to share?
Yeah, for sure. So you can I have a website, drstefjohnson.com, and Inclusify, my book, has a webpage, inclusifybook.com. And of course, like, you can get the book anywhere that books are sold. And upcoming projects. One thing I'm super fascinated about right now and trying to dive into a bit more are the government legislation on women on boards. So I think having more women board members in companies creates a lot of opportunity for gender equity, but it also improves things like stock prices. So I think it's just good. And like the state of California and the US, and like, several countries in Europe have instated, I think, like, maybe I'll call them quotas. Like, you have to have some women on your board. Maybe it's 40% in Norway. And California, I think it's like 2 women. And I'm really, really fascinated to look at how that actually impacts companies over time. And if you had 2 women before, or 40% women, what is the impact when everyone has 40% women? Because maybe that is, that was your competitive advantage, is you actually had that diversity of thought on your leadership team. And once it's mandated, like, maybe all companies go up in value, or maybe you see that companies that are like forced to do it versus those that choose to do it have less of a benefit. I don't know, but that's why it's like, I love things like that are a puzzle, because you can see, like, it could go this way, it could go that way. And I think it's just an extraordinary time in history, because this is becoming much more prevalent, at the commitment to gender equity at the top of organizations. And so I want to know, like, what's the impact of that?